Hey, this is Adam with Mile High Stash, the podcast that asks what 5 albums you would take to a remote Colorado cabin in the event of a zombie apocalypse. Armed with only food, water, and a crank-powered Victrola, what 5 records would you want?
Go on, chase that girl. Go on, get that money. Go on, break the world.
Welcome to your post-Christmas Monday morning hangover, people. Also the end of Hanukkah. And I hope that it was all sababa, as they say in Israel. Today we have Steve Berlin of Los Lobos on Mile High Stash. Los Lobos is one of the great American bands of all time, and no one can tell me different. I'm excited to share our conversation with you. Steve and I really dug into his personal history with the LA punk scene and the Blasters, and how he sort of, in baseball terms, opted for free agency and famously signed with Los Lobos about 40 years ago. He also threw me a pretty serious curveball during this episode when he told me all 5 of his albums at once. That's on me for not saying, give me your first one. So, as the catcher in this situation, I'll try to throw down the right signs from now on. And also, because a bunch of people asked, I've started a Mile High Stash playlist on Spotify. So not only can you listen to Mile High Stash, the podcast, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else, you can also find the Mile High Stash playlist on Spotify. And every week I'll add songs from every album my guests choose. Here's my chat with Steve Berlin of Los Lobos and Los Super 7 and a lot more. But first, some words about Spirit Hound Distillers, one of my favorite spots of any kind in Colorado, for homemade spirits and live music, and also just the staff there is wonderful as well. Amanda actually plays on my softball team. Anyway, we'll talk soon.
I've done all I can. Just don't ask me to be the big.
Spirit Hound Distillers has been crafting premium spirits in Lyons, Colorado for a decade and specializes in gin, vodka, rum, and barrel-aged whiskeys made from Colorado ingredients. Did you know that the Whiskey of the Year is made right here in Colorado at Spirit Hound? Yes, Spirit Hound was honored to win the London Spirits competition as both Whiskey of the Year and Best in Show. Everything Spirit Hound makes is from right here in Colorado. Come visit them for a tour or a night of live music and cocktails, or ask for Spirit Hound wherever you shop in Colorado.
Well, I gave all I could. I guess living the bad life, brother.
Hey man,
Hey, Steve, how are you?
good. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
Fuck yeah. So you're in Portland, is that right?
Actually, I live in Southwest Washington, so I'm 15 miles away from Portland, on the other side of Columbia River,
Yeah. And how long have you been there?
since 2017.
So,
I moved to Portland. I was in Portland in 2005, so I've been in the area for a little while.
and how did you choose that?
Just I just it's always been a cool place. My wife and my family and I were living on an island off the coast of Seattle prior to that, and island life is great until it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when it was time for more of a city vibe, we looked around. Seattle was kind of expensive, and Portland at that time was much cheaper. So we picked Portland.
Yeah. So I was hanging out at the Stanley Hotel like 3 years ago, with my buddy Taylor Scott, the guitar player.
Oh yeah,
And I had interviewed Louis, for I think Westward in Denver. And one of the few acts that I'm starstruck by is Los Lobos. And just the fact that you and Taylor were sitting up at a table together in the bar at the Stanley, I was like, oh my God, you were sitting next to Steve Berlin, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that is normal for you across the country, that you find these kids who are phenoms and then ask them to sit in, or is that rare?
I'd say it's kind of, I mean, it's not like every city has a Taylor Scott. I mean,
Yeah,
it's kind of unusual. We, uh, I mean, if put it this way, if there is somebody talented and, you know, either a friend of a friend or, somebody that we know, yeah, we'll invite them up to play. I mean, it's not unusual. It's, we enjoy it.
yeah. Um, I wanted to ask you about your history with Colorado. Like what are some of your best memories of playing in the Rocky Mountains?
Oh man. We did one run one summer that was, or summer, one winter that was like we didn't come below 88,000, yeah, 8,000 feet the whole time. So
Mhm.
that one sticks out just because I remember not breathing or sleeping for a week.
Yeah,
It's kind of, it's not exactly friendly for a sax player to be up that high
right.
and that dry. So it was different. Um, we've had a lot of fun shows. I remember like sitting in with leftover salmon at Ophelia's. That was super fun. I actually did some shows with Taylor, like some little like community, like we played in like what's that, Silverthorne, I think it's called, like just
Yeah.
some little, like outdoor pavilion with him. That was super fun. I don't know. I really enjoyed all my time in Colorado. I made a bunch of records there. I've got a lot of good friends there. It's always been kind of a special place for
Yeah.
me. Anyway, four salmon records and a string cheese record and sheesh, who else? I mean, there's plenty of them. Um, Michelle Sarah, just lots and lots of them.
So the premise of my show is that I've been doing articles for many years, doing interviews for newspapers, and it's fun to kind of show people the the more lengthy um, experience, the personality of the people I talk to, rather than just some quotes in an article that I write. And the fun part is having the theme, be these five albums. And so you've spent a lot of time in Colorado, so just imagine that you're stuck in a cabin in the winter, and uh, to make it even more entertaining, there are zombies outside, and you don't know whether your family and friends are, I hate to say it, but eaten. And so it's kind of a twist on the desert island scenario, because
Yeah.
it's not so pleasant. And so we kind of interrupt our life of Steve Berlin interview to ask you what your five albums would be.
Well, it's funny. I guess I didn't get the zombie. I thought that was humorous. I didn't really get the actual subtext of a zombie apocalypse
Yeah,
happening. And I will say that it's like it's literally impossible for me to five albums is like I don't know. It's a challenge, but so my five today, like this would change like in 45 minutes if you ask me again. But
right.
like 45 minutes that I spent doing it to this. Charles Mingus, Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. It's one special record for me.
Oh,
Uh,
sweet.
Miles Bitches Brew, the band, the second one. Little Feat Dixie Chicken, and Caetano Veloso, a record called Libro from it's about 15 or 20 years old now.
Can you tell me about that one? Because that's the only one I'm unfamiliar with.
He's a really interesting guy. He's sort of like the Dylan of Brazilian music, more or less.
Mm.
He's been through, changed his stripes a zillion times. Actually got arrested and went to jail for a time when the government didn't want to hear what he had to say. And this record is one that's like it's very it's orchestral, but like with a lot of like Brazilian themes and percussion, and it's just exquisite. It's just, like I've turned people onto it. Just, you don't really understand a single word he's saying, and he still makes you cry your eyes out. It's just special in a lot of different ways. He's got a kind of slightly Dylan-esque voice. He's not a great singer. I think he's an amazing singer, but it's not, it's a voice, he's not, he's not Pavarotti or anything like that. It's a kind of a unique instrument.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to work with him. I was, like it was it was an amazing experience to just kind of hang around with him. And he recorded a song on one of the Super 7 records. So I got to
Oh, wow.
go to his place and hang out with him and talk about music. And it was unbelievable.
I'm hoping that anybody who listens to this and hasn't heard Los Super 7, checks it out, because Latin Playboys is worth listening to, and Los Super 7. That song Teresa is one that it actually reminds me of Thelonious Monk a little bit, the piano part in that.
That's
It's just
that's high praise. The Super 7 records they're just a ball. They both of them have been incredibly fun to make, and I think we're going to do another one. We're seriously talking about it. I had a couple meetings already, so I
nice.
think there might be yet one more. Yeah.
Motel room on borrowed time to write the words again. Take it down to pin it on your dress.
I'd like to go all the way back. I wanted to know whether you spent all of your childhood in Philadelphia.
I spent all of my childhood in Philadelphia. I left when I was 19, 18,
Yeah.
and moved to LA. But yeah, my entire childhood was spent there.
And was moving to LA the best choice you ever made?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't be talking to you had I chose some city. It kind of changed everything for me. That's it's where I met all the people I've played with, and allowed me to, kind of fulfill my dreams. So yeah, it's definitely a good move.
And did you get involved with the music scene, the Blasters, and then Los Lobos? Did all of that happen for you fairly quickly when you moved there?
Yeah. Well, I moved there. I arrived like Christmas '74, so I was there from '75 on. And those first couple of years, I I came basically to play with a band of guys from Philly that had moved out and who were basically like a rhythm section, and they got hired by both Billy Preston and Greg Allman, like not long after arriving. But not long after my arrival, they lost both gigs. Not, I had nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
I had nothing to do with it. Just Billy had to leave town because he was about to be arrested for something, and Greg. That was like the era when Greg was with Cher,
Right.
and his life was like a circus, and so he basically had to check out of his life for a while too. But so we decided, the guys from Philly and myself, just to put a band together, and so we did, and we got signed to Casablanca Records, and so this would be '77. So I kind of got to see firsthand, like a little small taste of what the music business was like, at that era anyway. Like it was certainly not the '60s, and not the late '70s was basically just, it's kind of it was the moment before everything changed more or less. So it was kind of silly. The band we were good. We were actually really good, but it was it was just a funny era. The label was basically just a front for cocaine shipping around the world. So
what was the name of that band, Steve?
It was called the Beckmeyer Brothers Band. Okay. So these two brothers they were from New York, who had moved to Philly, and were playing with a band called the Soul Survivors, who had hits in the '60s. Expressway to Your Heart was their big hit, but they were sort of like a white soul band, more or less. And that was sort of what we did when we came to LA. Like it was sort of the same. I guess the paradigm would be roughly like the Boz Scaggs records of that era. We had a couple singers. There were three guys that could sing in the band. One of them was a guy who went on to sing and play with Frank Zappa, a guy named R.A. Martin, who was really great, good looking, great singer, great voice. So it was kind of it was a fun, it was fun. I mean, I got to make a record in a studio with a big time producer, even though he was an idiot. So I got to see the whole rigmarole. And so I was sort of like, I learned some things, learned what to do, what not to do, probably more what not to do than what to do. But the whole experience was cool. I mean, I was very young. I was not even 20 when all this was going down. So it was kind of, an interesting way to more or less grow up.
Yeah. And how did you end up in the Blasters?
Well, I was playing, so that band kind of blew up. I mean, it just kind of fell apart really. And the record didn't do anything. I was sort of like pretty much, I was, the youngest by, 7 or 8 years. So I was sort of like, I had I wasn't like them basically. Like they had a different agenda. And I kind of wanted to explore what the scene that was sort of developing all around LA, and these guys couldn't care less about it. Mm-hmm. So I started playing with this guy named Fast Freddie, who had a band called the Precisions. And Freddie he was a writer. He had like he wrote for a couple of local paper, like the local zines, the music papers, but he was like, he was beloved by everybody. Like he knew everybody. He couldn't really sing per se, but he was kind of, that didn't stop him. That didn't stop anybody really. I mean, like not being able to sing or play was no impediment to starting a band in that era.
Right.
So, but it was a fun band. Like we would do that kind of fun stuff. And he was beloved by a lot of people, including the Blasters. So it wasn't unusual for Freddie to open a show for the Blasters. And so I became friends with the Alvin brothers, and we would have like these like all night, beer record parties at the Alvin's house where, just like try to out obscure each other with bizarre R&B records. And that was kind of like my education. That was not the I didn't really know that much about like, 40s and 50s R&B until I started hanging out and playing with Freddie and certainly hanging out with the Alvin brothers. But I was not really in the Blasters. I was just friends with them. And then one day I was working at a music store, and Dave called the music store. It was before cell phones. And so he was trying to find me, and he asked if I had a baritone sax. I did not, but I said that I did. And he said, well, come to the studio. We're cutting this song, I'm Shaking. So that was like the phone call that changed my life, basically. So I went down and I borrowed took a horn off the rack at the music store and went down to the studio, and it went well. And then they said, well, what are you doing tomorrow? And I said, you tell me. And they said, come back, we'll do some more stuff. So that's kind of where it all started, really. And I was asked to join it was never really asked to join. I just assumed that I would join the band. So I did. And then, we hit the road. And so I was in the Blasters for the next, 2 years, I guess, 2 or 3 years, something like that.
When did you start playing sax?
I started, let's see, I was playing harmonica when I was in high school. And then, actually before high school. And then I loved playing harmonica, but it wasn't, I really wasn't, there's not a whole lot of ways to express yourself if you're not a great player. So I started playing soprano sax, but I would run it through a bunch of like an amp and pedals and stuff like that. I kind of wanted to get like the sound of an amplified harmonica, but with more note choices. And that was my main axe for the whole, when I was in Philly, and then when I left Philly for LA. But the Beckmeyer brothers at one point said, if you don't show up with another horn tomorrow, you're fired. So I had to expand my palette a little bit. So I started playing tenor. I got a tenor and started playing tenor. And then literally that phone call from Dave Alvin was when I started playing baritone. So, and that's kind of been my main axe ever since, the baritone.
Did you have a point where you maybe realized that, like a baseball player who can play, who's a utility player, that you would always have a job if you could play numerous instruments?
I never really I never had to plan like that. I've always managed to like somehow or another luck into situations where I don't really have to ask myself those questions. I mean,
Mm,
from Freddie to the Blasters to Lobos, I mean, it's always sort of been, I just sort of was in the right place at the right time with the right people.
yeah. Well, um, it's legendary, Los Lobos hiring you. And I don't know the whole story, but I can theorize that it's kind of like how the Dodgers kind of get any player they want. And that's so the Lobos are kind of like another LA team that just says, hey, we want that guy.
No, it wasn't like that at all, to be honest with you. It was, I mean, I was in the Blasters. They were actually paying me a weekly salary, which
Mm,
was, really amazing. And my life was very simple. I had a really cheap apartment in Venice. So it was life was pretty cool. It was, not it was no challenge to make the rent with what I was getting paid from those guys. But they were it was a weird situation in that they were fighting literally all the time about anything and everything.
mm,
They were known. I mean, any brother band, almost all of them, there's always like a built-in sort of sense of contentiousness, and they were no strangers to it.
look at the
And
Kinks.
yeah, like the Kinks, or like you name it, like the Oasis. I mean, there's
Mm,
like just brothers are really hard to share musical endeavors with. I guess I don't know. It's hard for me to
yeah.
understand, but they were always squabbling about stuff, and the other guys in the band were also kind of all squabbling about stuff. And I was the youngest and the newest, so nobody really wanted to hear anything I had to say. But I was the only one in the band that had ever like, actually, well, actually, they had made a record by the time I showed up, but I was like, I wasn't completely, new. I had actually had a little bit of experience, even though I was, well younger than them. And I could, it seemed like they were doing dumb stuff, which they were. I mean,
mm,
they were making, like, not, I don't know. I mean, not, I wouldn't say dumb stuff, but it was just like they didn't want to hear anything I had to say.
yeah.
Uh, so just being in that situation, even though I love them and I love playing with them, and certainly I love Lee Allen was my hero. The sax player in the Blasters, the other sax player was somebody I literally worshipped and still think of like he's the most important person in my life. It was still kind of a tough situation in that, like, it just wasn't, how should I say this? I mean, it was a great thing. Like, I was playing in a band and traveling all over the world, really. But at the same time, I was sort of like, I had other things in mind. Like, I wanted to produce records, and I wanted to, I certainly didn't want to imagine that my future would be one where I wouldn't be able to have an opinion about stuff.
Hmm.
But that, in the Blasters, that was more or less guaranteed that nobody wanted to hear a single thing I had to say about anything.
Mm,
So, uh, so one weekend the Blasters were playing at the Whiskey, and this band Los Lobos opens up, and they're unbelievably great, and no one had ever seen anything like them. There was just this amazing. It was like I don't know. It was like a just overnight success. Literally, like the next day, that literally anybody and everybody in LA, and it was a small scene. That's all we wanted. All anybody was talking about was, did you see this band Los Lobos? So they said, we sort of just started talking, and they said, we have some songs that have sax parts if you want to, hang out with us and learn them. And I said, yeah, by all means, I'd love to. So, it just sort of started there. And, I went to their rehearsal place in East LA and
yeah.
hung out with them and learned a bunch of songs. I mean, I didn't start, hustling a producer gig out of it, but I was, I just sort of wanted to see what that was about. And, it's just sort of nice being treated with respect, basically. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
that was a big part of it for me. I mean, I didn't really, I wasn't really thinking in terms of big, 40, 50-year career moves. I just
Hmm.
wanted to be around people that would at least listen to what I had to say, if not necessarily, agree with me.
Yeah.
Um, so we just sort of, I mean, I just sort of started doing more and more shows. Well, a show for them would be like playing at a quinceañera or a political event or something, like
Yeah.
sports, the Blasters were playing for, 1,000, 2,000 people like all over the world. And the Lobos were playing for like a bunch of people in the backyard, but it was still really fulfilling and great to hang out with them. And we just had a ball just being around each other. It was just fun. So this continued for a while, and I was like trying to play as much as I could with the Lobos, and I could sort of somewhat see the writing on the wall with the Blasters that like they were starting to involve the horns less and less, and Dave was sort of, I mean, it was pretty obvious to me that he was pulling away from his brother and from all the fighting that was going on.
Yeah.
So, one day the Lobos were going someplace and the Blasters were going somewhere else, and I just said, I'm going to go with these guys. And it wasn't, it didn't seem to bother anybody. Like they were like, oh, okay, it
Right.
wasn't like nobody tried to talk me out of it. Nobody said, that's a bad idea. I mean, I had friends that said it was a really bad idea because, I was giving up, you know, relatively marginal success for something that was highly, volatile. But like I said, like it wasn't like I was thinking that this was going to be a career defining choice. It would just sort of like it made sense to me on the emotional level and on the, just by being around people that I could hang out with and talk to and exchange ideas instead of being yelled at or yelled
Right.
around. They weren't yelling at me, but yelling at each other all the time. So I don't know, it was just sort of it, it didn't seem like it was that momentous of a move, but obviously it changed everything for me.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I wonder what it's like to join a band of guys who met in high school, and they formed in 1974, but as you were alluding to, it was mostly weddings and parties and things like that. And then um, I talked to Louis. I've interviewed Louis a couple of times, and he talks about how they made a conscious choice to start playing shows in the punk scene and maybe not make any money, but making connections and
Yeah.
relationships and things like that. And
Yeah, I was around for most of that. Yeah, it was true. I mean, they actually had a pretty solid living, in East LA, in and around East LA, just sort of doing these parties and stuff like that. But they were willing to experiment and, I mean, not necessarily lose money, but they were, they really did, took a bold chance by, saying, they're going to just stick it out and see what happens and playing
yeah,
it in the scene. And they were beloved though. I mean, everybody loved Los Lobos. I mean, it was just before I joined the band, I was, playing with all these other bands and just like, whenever like they were just like nobody didn't love hanging out with them, playing with them.
mm-hmm.
It was just sort of like because it was just such an improbable story. Like everybody else was sort of like, I tell this, this, like you think about it, like the band, like the oldest band on the scene at that moment, like let's say the band that had been around the longest might have been, let's say the Plugs was a band that I actually had played in for a while, or the Weirdos, and they, like their whole, life, their band had existed for 3 years, maybe not
Right.
even 2 years.
And there was X
And
too,
then
right?
an X, but X was the same
Mm-hmm.
thing. It was like, they'd been together for 2 years, maybe when the scene kind of blew up.
Mm-hmm.
And here these guys had played together for 7 or 8 years at that point. And it was just sort of like this sort of like, this sort of, I don't know, this sort of strength that comes from doing that nobody else had. Not that the other bands weren't strong or connected or
Mm-hmm.
great. I mean, certainly, X Blasters were all great. It was just sort of like the Lobos had this different um, sort of substructure of solidity and brotherhood that nobody else could have because they hadn't put the time in. They hadn't struggled the
Mm-hmm.
way, they hadn't done the stuff that Lobos did to get to that point.
Right.
It's just sort
Right.
of like it was just different. It was just like a very different vibe than anybody else, certainly anybody else on the scene. Just they just had like a different thing going on. It was, and plus, being multicultural and singing in Spanish. I mean, there's like a million reasons why
Yeah.
they were unique and beloved and like just special in and among the crowd.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always had this analogy in my head between the Pogues and Los Lobos these bands that came around at a time when, punk was originally about freedom. It was an idea you were doing something that was an alternative to the mainstream. And by the time that we're talking about, where Los Lobos is playing in the same scene as Black Flag and X and the Germs and these bands, punk was a sound. And so, sort of like the Pogues, what's more punk than saying we're going to play traditional music
Yeah,
and we're going to do it
do it our
with
way. Yeah.
our way.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, for one thing, we formed a very, very tight bond with the Pogues. I mean, we
Yeah.
for the most, like we were brothers from another mother, as they say. Like the first time we met, we were just like, oh yeah, we we recognize, game recognized game. It's like we recognize these guys as our, literally like the exact same idea from a
Mm,
different country.
that's great to hear.
Yeah, it was always a crazy when we would get together with them. But I don't know if it was any more or less punk than any what other people were doing. It's just sort of like a different, like that's just the sort of experimentation that was happening in that era. Like everybody was sort of trying to figure out, trying to recontextualize their lives and their music and trying to come up with something that was fun and repeatable and growable, I guess. And certainly for Lobos, it was this cultural that they really put the time in to learn the music and the instruments and learn the stories and learn the songs. So it was kind of a like, hey, look what we found kind of
Yeah.
thing, and we were able to sort of create this an identity out of it as we once we at one point there was like it's sort of like a separate thing, like the folkloric stuff and the rock and roll were like two separate baskets,
Mhm.
and then slowly over time, we figured out that, we could actually do both and create something kind of brand new out of putting it all together. And I'd say, the Pogues, certainly the people like the Pogues, Richard Thompson, the guys were huge fans of that, of that music. So they kind of like, we took a lot of, we learned a lot from watching them do that, and, stole a lot of ideas from them in terms of like how to incorporate traditional song forms and
Yeah.
instruments and everything else, try and make it happen.
Well, thankfully you didn't drink like them, so
We would,
that's
I
good.
don't know. I mean, we'd go toe for toe as long
Yeah.
as we could. I mean, I don't think that's one of the things that we got along quite well with, that we could hang with them. I
Yeah.
don't know if anybody could really drink with Shane, but
Mhm.
we certainly were no no slouches in that department.
Yeah. What was your history with Latin music before Los Lobos? Because a lot of people maybe think, well, Los Lobos grew up doing Mexican traditional music, Latin music, and then became rock. But actually, what happened was that a lot of those guys wanted to do rock.
Yeah, it was both. I mean, we all kind of grew up, children of 60s radio. Like, I was doing it in LA, and they were, or in Philly, and they were doing it in LA. And so, we had a lot of the same touchstones as far as that's concerned. They just chose at a certain point to like go and study
Mhm.
the music of their culture, and it was more or less, it started as just kind of an experiment. Like somebody asked them to do it, I think, for a party, and they kind of got into it, and then they really got into it as they went deeper. But
Yeah.
it wasn't like they were like classical people trying to play jazz, or what I mean, like
Yeah.
it was always just the notion of the music was something fun to do. But they would, when they would go home, they'd listen to Cream and the Stones and the Beatles and everything, like the same stuff that effectively I was listening to in Philly. I just didn't have the cultural, the cultural component myself. But
Right.
I had literally zero. I mean, I knew nothing about Latin music whatsoever when I growing up in Philly. Nothing. There was no.
Yeah.
I knew a lot about soul music. And I knew a lot about jazz. I mean, I was sort of a jazz snob for a while, and certainly I knew a bit about rock. But I learned everything I learned about Latin music came once I joined Lobos and hung out and got to experience it with them. And then I
And
went deep on it myself.
were you on that first EP in A Time to Dance?
Yes, I started it. When the record, when we finally got signed to Slash. I was still in the Blaster. So I started the record as producer, and then by the time the record was done, I was in the band. So I'm not on the, it's just the four guys on the album cover,
Yeah.
and I'm just credited for playing on a couple songs. But when it started, I was, that was sort of like the moment when I was transitioning from one band to the other.
Yeah. Did you have any idea that joining that band would mean, within I don't know, 5 years, you would find such mainstream success? You'd be on the Grammys and
No, certainly, like, no, absolutely not. None of us. I mean, every single thing that happened was surprising and wonderful and unexpected. No, we certainly, we had no designs on pop stardom. We were just happy to be making a living playing music. And basically that's still the way we think about it. I mean, it's still
yeah,
just very grateful to have a job doing this stuff. But no, I certainly, it was not like, I'm going to join this band and, go top of the pops. I mean,
right.
and La Bamba was, when we started it, I mean, even when we finished it, it wasn't like we thought this was going to be some giant hit thing. It was, a small movie with a first time director and a cast of people in the movie that no one had ever heard of or seen before.
Yeah,
It wasn't like, it certainly was not a situation where like, oh, this is going to be, top of the pops. I mean, it was anything but, really.
yeah.
But it happened. I mean, it was kind of a magical experience, but, certainly going into it, we were just doing it because the family asked us to, and they were his, Richie's family was friends of ours. They had taken care of us
Mm.
long before there was any, like when we were touring around Central California, they would like feed us and house us and kind of like be our family away from home when we were in their area.
Located in heavenly Gold Hill, Colorado, the Gold Hill Inn was built in 1924 and has been owned and operated by the Finn family for the last 60 years. The inn is known for its fabulous 3 or 6 course meals and unforgettable concerts by local artists, from Gasoline Lollipops to Gregory Alan Isakov. To get up to where time stands still, take Sunshine Canyon or 4 Mile Canyon from Boulder and experience the Gold Hill Inn's wonderful food and music with all the fixins.
And when did you decide to become a producer and branch out from being a sideman?
Well, I'd always, even like back in Philly, I was always sort of fascinated by the idea of how the records got made. So
Mhm.
um, it was, it was always sort of like, it was the back of my mind aspiration when I was in Philly, but I would, like even then, like I had a band before the band that I went to LA with that I had produced, I guess. I mean, I didn't know it was producing, but I
Mm.
kind of made a little EP of that band. I just sort of like, it was always a thing that I was fascinated by. And then, um, when I got to LA and certainly like like watching the band that got signed, screw up watching them make mistake after mistake. I kind of learned a lot. And then this sort of punk rock thing was happening in LA, and it was like all of a sudden I was able to manifest it. So I had produced a couple things before Lobos, and I mean, certainly Lobos was the highest profile thing that I'd done, but I was always there. Like I always wanted to to learn how to do it. Like how do you actually get something made?
Yeah.
And slowly, like trial by lots of error and screw up after screw up and bad record after bad record, I kind of figured
Mhm.
out how to do it the way I think it's supposed to be done.
I think anybody who grew up in the 80s just really remembers that moment when La Bamba came out and all of a sudden you were household names.
It was unique. Yeah, that was true. Like, it went from what do you do? I play in a band. What band? Los Lobos. Never heard of you. So then, what do you do? I play in a band. Los Lobos. I never heard of you. Well, you heard the movie La Bamba? Like, yeah, that was us. Oh shit. So yeah, it was interesting. Still, to this day, I mean, it's still, everybody knows the movie. Everybody, it 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 seems to have affected a lot of people. So yeah, it was a blessing, obviously. But we had, again, like no clue that it was going to be anything. I mean, at no time in the making of any part of it did it seem like it was going to be successful on any level. It was a kind of a giant mess for about 90% of it, and then like right at the end they kind of pulled it all together. And um I was the one that was doing most of the actual work on the movie. The guys were making By the Light of the Moon, while I was doing, like kind of like coordinating our bits and the other parts of the movie. And, so I was watching it more or less every day for 6 months, probably.
Wow.
And it wasn't a bad, like, I can't say it was it wasn't a bad movie, but it was kind of a mess. They didn't really, the script went a couple different directions before they sort of solidified it. There was a long, boring, like 20-minute, like peyote dream sequence at one point that was really
Right. Yeah, it's like
just,
the Doors almost.
yeah. So that was that they cut that made a big, that was the part, once that was sort of chopped out, then the movie made a lot more sense. But they didn't cast the Lou Diamond Phillips. They didn't find him until well after the movie had begun. So they had basically shot every scene that he wasn't in before he showed up. And I just remembered Luis, the director, saying, "Don't you know any Chicanos who could sing? Don't you know any good-looking young Chicanos?" Like, he was trying, like, it had to be someone who had, Chicano or Latin ancestry,
Yeah.
at least. So it was, it was interesting. Like, again, like it just seemed like it was a big giant mess until suddenly it all kind of lined up. And it's like, oh, it's a really good movie. And I just remember like walking out of the editing room my last day working on it. We were getting ready to go to Europe. And I just remember, like, I saw the final cut with the final, like, everything, like more or less the movie that came out. And I just remember thinking, wow, they really pulled it together. It's a pretty good movie. It's a shame no one's going to see it. So,
How wrong can you be?
yeah, well, that's not the first time I've been 100% wrong.
Yeah.
I got used to it.
Can you talk a little about whether there was, after the success of La Bamba, whether there was some disconnect between you guys and the record label, maybe about wanting to cash in on that and have,
No,
Los Lobos' big hit record.
certainly no one who we listened to at the label would ever
Right.
say that. Like, there were people who might have thought that, but
Yeah.
like, we didn't really care about, we really only talked to a couple of people at the label. Lenny Waronker and Mo Austin, and like a very, very, very small, like Tom Wally when he was there. Like, there wasn't a lot of people who we really liked or trusted. I mean, there was when we started, it was like a big family, but like, even as that was happening, it was sort of like the company was growing, and there was often like you'd walk in, like, you go into somebody's, you go to stop in someone's office and like, hey, where'd he go? It's like, oh, he was fired. I'm the new guy. Like, wow, really?
Yeah.
Or he not fired, but he got headhunted elsewhere. So
Mhm.
we didn't really care or listen to very many people at the label, and no one that we cared about would have ever said, what about La Bamba 2? Because number one, we did almost all of the songs that he wrote were done in the movie. And what would that be? Like, it was, there was, the songs that weren't in the movie were not very good songs, to be perfectly honest. So it wasn't like there was a thing, there was no way to do it. And we were well aware that it was sort of, it was a dream. Like, this was not a ringing endorsement of Los Lobos, the band. It was all about the movie and how the movie affected people, and how, like, this sort of like this surprising story of a movie, kind of coming out of nowhere and affecting all these people. But we were well aware that it was not, like, it wasn't like somebody like discovering like REM or
Mhm.
you know you name it, like Coldplay or something like that. Like, oh, this I heard this great band, and then you go deep in the catalog and you want to know what like the way bands get discovered. This was like it really didn't like the numbers, like it wasn't like all of a sudden like the records prior were selling crazy. Like the By the Light of the Moon did almost nothing because everybody was all they cared about was La Bamba. So
Yeah.
it was a different sort of success, and when it was done, it was done. Like it was like being on a rocket ship. It went up to to outer space, but then when it came down more or less right where we started, and we were within a couple of years, 3-4 years maybe, we were playing the exact same places we were playing before. I mean, mind you, there were more people there, and more people knew who we were. It wasn't like it was for nothing, but it didn't really materially affect as much as you might have thought from the success of La Bamba and the movie and everything else.
Yeah. I've heard Louis say that maybe there was some incredulousness from the label when you said you wanted to do La Pistola y el
Oh, yeah.
Corazon.
Yeah, that was, they were, we're going to follow up a multi-million selling record with a bunch of folkloric Mexican folkloric music. Yeah, that wasn't like it wasn't they weren't giving us a standing ovation for that call.
Yeah.
But to their great credit, and I will very specifically cite Lenny Walker, who was the one who we were kind of pitching that to. He was always on our side. He was always for the art and not for the money. Like he did not like he knew that we were building something much bigger than La Bamba, and we wanted to have a career. So he, I don't think it was like, they saw money going out the window. I mean, they just respected the fact that we had an idea, and we felt like somehow, some way we wanted to take the attention that we had earned from La Bamba and put on something that was both close to our heart and gave us an opportunity to effectively clear the decks for whatever was going to happen next.
Yeah.
So it was very artistically important to us that we kind of correct the record. Not that, I mean, I don't know if it was that, like we had to do it to sort of set the record straight. It was just a way of us saying to the world, well, you think we're this, we're actually this. So, deal with it.
Yeah. So how do you, fast forward from that moment to Kiko, and then figuring out who Steve Berlin is and what it is you do. If somebody says to you, what do you do? What's your answer? And how did you come to that?
Well, I'm a musician first, I think, first and foremost, and then producer. So, that's how I'd answer the question. Then how, like where Kiko came from, I think I could tell you was, so we did, all right, so La Bamba happened, and then we did Pistola.
Mm-hmm.
And then time for another, and then we had done By the Light of the Moon, but that was sort of like, By the Light of the Moon was not it was kind of tough. Like it wasn't, it took a really long time. We spent a lot of money. It wasn't artistically satisfying. And then we had La Bamba, which was its own thing. And then Pistola, which was very artistically satisfying. And then it came time to make another record. And, I wasn't producing it, we sort of like worked our way through the T-Bone Experience. So he wasn't going to be involved. So we gave that title to Larry Hirsch, who had engineered Will the Wolf Survive and By the Light of the Moon, and had kind of earned his stripes more or less, but had never produced anything. And that turned out to be a bad idea. Like he didn't really, like he was really, 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 like he felt like anything he did or, any movie tried was like going to be the end of his career if it didn't work. So I don't know. He was kind of a high strung. I mean, he's a very talented engineer, brilliant engineer, but was not a producer. Like he really didn't understand like what the job was, and how to do it. So we ended up like redoing all of the songs on that record, like over and over and over and over and over, like a million times. It's just stupid, like wringing the life. Like we rehearsed them and then we toured them and then we recorded them and then we recorded them again and recorded them again. Really, because Larry was not, he just wasn't, he nothing was ever good enough. Like he didn't think anything was going to be good enough quality wise for him. So we really kind of killed ourselves trying to get the record made. And then we were already sick of the songs by the time it was done. And then we had to go tour it for a year and a half. So sort of a weird situation. Then, we were touring sort of like thinking that we had earned this, this thing from the La Bamba experience, but it turns out we had sort of overestimated our popularity. So we were out, touring with a lighting crew and two buses and spending a lot of money and losing a lot of money. So we came back from that whole thing like kind of tired and pissed off and effectively broke. We had, for the first time literally in the history of the band, we had lost money on a tour. Like we never, even from the early days, we always managed to come home with something. And because we had sort of bought this idea that we were, rock stars now, we ended up, taking it in the shorts. So it's time to make another record. We're pissed off at the world, pissed off at ourselves for being stupid and not, trusting ourselves and listening to, getting bad advice all the way around. And so we started making this record so I had produced a couple records with this guy, Paul Dugray, and he had a studio in downtown LA. This was before downtown LA was like the hip place to be. This was when it was really kind of a shithole, and it was kind of scary, and like it was, most people would have, avoid it if they could. But this guy Paul had a pretty cool studio, and he was a really, really good engineer, and it was really cheap. So I suggested that we do some, we basically cut some demos for the next record there, because I think Lenny wanted to hear what we were going to do next, and we were also like adamant about producing ourselves, not me, but like we had basically gone through, Larry didn't work, we're done with T-Bone. We're kind of like, again, like at this point we were, anybody who had advised us and told us to do stuff, it felt like all that advice had been 100% wrong. Like nothing anybody had told us was useful for who we were and what we wanted to do. So we started doing these songs, and we were really happy with them. Like it was, we thought it was pretty great, and we realized it didn't sound like anything we had ever done, but we were gonna like, we're like really adamant that this is the sound that we wanted to make. Like this was where we wanted to go, and if the label didn't like it, then fuck them, and if the world didn't like it, fuck them. We were just gonna do it. And again, we took it to Lenny, and to his enormous credit, he kind of got it. He was like, yeah, this is great. But I think you guys should talk to Mitchell Froom about, maybe working with him. And I would say if like of any, like had he said any other name, we would have said, fuck no. But we had done a little stuff with Mitchell. He did the La Bamba single. Like I didn't do the single. He did the single. And he had done one song on The Neighborhood, the one song that actually was not, we didn't beat to death. It was a song called Be Still. And it was sort of, to me, like Be Still was the first song of Kiko. It's on a different record, but that's the first time that we really kind of figured out how to utilize the sounds and rhythms, like how to use the cultural, the stuff we had learned, like taking a Mexican rhythm, a 200-year-old Mexican rhythm, and turning it into a pop song. And that's kind of what Kiko was about, like using, like taking the colors and tools and the sounds that we'd sort of discovered and sort of kept in separate baskets. Now we were all about like mixing them up and trying to turn it into something else. So that was Mitchell and Chad Blake, who was very, very significant in all this stuff, the engineer. And we were like, yeah, let's talk to him. And so we had like a brief conversation with him. And they were sort of like, we were in this really angry place. Like we felt like we had been effectively lied to by the music industry, like all this advice we had taken, and basically, made us broke and unhappy and angry. and they were sort of in the same place. So we started, that collaboration with them on Kiko coming from a place of like, fuck the music business, fuck everybody.
Mhm.
We're just going to do what the fuck we want to do. And and we're not listening to anybody tell us anything. And they were like, fuck yeah, we're right there with you. So, I mean, it's a beautiful record. I'm very proud of it, but it really came from a place of deep anger and like we were just
Mhm.
like done with a lot of the shit that we were getting told. Um, but it was the perfect combination. I mean, they were like Chad was really, really, just so gifted and like, he could make everything sound amazing and
Yeah.
beautiful. Um, and we just it was like the perfect marriage of people. Like everybody, the whole thing was just a dream. Like I don't remember, like just every day was just this very like, you never knew what the hell was going to happen. And the songs came together in really in beautiful, amazing, inspiring ways. And it was just a amazing thing to be part of. And
That's
again, like we had no idea, like we didn't think, well, we love what we were doing, but we didn't think the label was going to, that we didn't think it was commercial. It certainly didn't sound like La Bamba, and it certainly didn't sound like anything else we'd ever done, but we loved it. And again, to their great credit, Lenny was like, yeah, this is amazing. This is great. I'm
yeah.
just keep going. I mean, at one point we had to sort of like get a temperature check from him. And he was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I hoped you guys would be doing. So, carry on.
Mm.
It was pretty great.
It was great to hear how you described Be Still and it being, you're discovering this melting pot. And do you feel like once you had that formula, the rest of your career, I mean, it wasn't like you even had a Los Lobos sound, but you maybe discovered anything was possible.
Yeah. I mean, that was the first time we'd ever, like, we really kind of realized, we had all this stuff that we had collected, all these sounds and rhythms, like all this stuff that we had, we could really create something unique out of. We didn't have to keep them separate. It was kind of dumb to keep them separate
Yeah.
in the first place, but we didn't really trust we didn't think, for somehow, some way, we needed to get to a place where the idea of combining all this stuff made more sense. Like it didn't, had we tried it early on, I don't think we were as confident in our ability, like
Mhm.
like as certainly, and the songs were not capable vehicles for what we were thinking. Like I really think it took us getting to Kiko for the songs to sort of like be appropriate for this kind of idea. And then certainly, getting Mitchell and Chad and their whole sonic approach of endless experimentation is what kind of made the whole thing kind of viable. And that's how it sort of took off. I mean, that it was just
Yeah.
literally every single person was in the same like headspace at the same time, ready for it to happen.
How did you get Louis to sing a song and and uh, he described it to me as being chased down the street and he hid under a car and then you guys convinced him to sing a song.
Well, he's not a aggressive guy, certainly by any stretch of the imagination. But it was like he had the perfect voice for that song. It was like
Mhm.
it was he wrote it, and it wasn't if you listen to it, I don't think it's not a Dave song, it's certainly not a Caesar song. It's a Louis
Mhm.
song. So um, he can be convinced if in the right moment to do like we didn't have to like put a gun to his head or anything. Like we just had
Yeah.
to talk him through the process, and he was good to go.
Right. Um, you know, Speaking of melting pot, I mean, I am a Los Lobos super fan, and I'll tell everybody that. But my theory, if you give me a pen and scratch paper of why Los Lobos uh, is the greatest American band, is because it's a melting pot. It's because that's what America was supposed to be. And you have roughly the same members this entire time. And then on top of that, every time you guys make a record, you're not resting on your laurels. You're not going with, what should we sound like in order to please people? It's always moving forward. And my question to you is, what can I do? What can anybody do to get you guys in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
Why? What is the big deal?
I don't know. Honestly, yeah, it's something we spend literally 0 minutes thinking about.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like the awards and stuff like that, they're lovely. I mean, the Grammy last year was, a huge surprise. I mean, it was
Yeah.
delightful and wonderful, but it's, we don't ever think or talk or like spend any time like on, why haven't this happened? It just, we're just making music. It doesn't, like, all that stuff is like, it's nice. Certainly, we're going to hit 50 next year. That's going to be a thing.
Mhm.
But we just don't think that way. It's not. I don't know. It's just we don't care.
Yeah.
It really doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's lovely again, like the acknowledgement of our peers is delightful, and we certainly, it's not like we don't respect the people respect us. I mean, certainly that's a
Mhm.
big thing, but it's not. Again, it's like we just do not spend anything, like, you asked the question, I would say don't do anything. Just, time will either, it'll happen
Yeah.
or it won't happen. But we know we're happy with what we have built, what we've built. I think the catalog speaks for itself. The songs, by and large, are pretty good. So that's all we ask for. We don't care about nothing else.
Yeah. This last album um was covers of Los Angeles songs essentially, and he recorded it and toured it, and as you just mentioned, it won a Grammy, and it's wonderful. And I'm wondering if there's any discussion of the next original Los Lobos record.
Haven't really started that process yet, to be perfectly honest. It's been this year, 2022 was really busy. Like up through the summer, it was super busy. We kind of slowed down a little bit. We're about to get relatively busy again. So I think, I know we know that it's probably time. I know, certainly we owe the label. We know there's another record in the contract,
Mm.
but we haven't really talked about it because, one thing is, it's like, so if it's connected to the 50th, like, how do you make a record that speaks to a 50-year legacy? I mean, it's impossible.
Yeah.
And certainly, it's hard enough to to make a decent record, much less one that carries the weight of a 50-year, like trying to say something of a statement that reflects the gravity of that. So we sort of, we don't, it's not like we don't work well under pressure, but we certainly don't need that pressure.
Yeah.
It's useful or helpful on any level. So I don't know. It would be the short answer of like what we're going to do about it,
Mm.
or how we're going to deal with it. It's just sort of like, uh, at some point it'll dawn on us, and we'll either do it
Yeah.
or we'll put it off till 51, and we're not going to have to worry about it. But it is like, even though we don't really care about the accolades or anything, like 50 is significant, and we just don't know how, frankly, to address it. It's a, we certainly didn't imagine it at 20 or 30 or 40, even that we'd be here at
Yeah.
50 with the same guys, getting ready to, doing the same stuff. So, yeah, hopefully somebody will come up with a good idea. I don't know. I really don't know how to process it, to be honest with you.
Does the band have plans to tour next year?
Yeah, we'll definitely be touring, and I
Yeah.
think be if I mean, at least there'll be uh a couple of concerts that, like a 50th anniversary thing with friends and, people doing stuff. I mean, we'll at some point in the year there will be an appropriately sized event to celebrate. I just don't know when, where, how, or anything like
Yeah.
that. But I know that the conversation has begun. Clearly, we're going to have to, rely on people that are better at this than we are.
Mm.
But I think, that will happen at some point. I just don't. I'm not 100% sure what any of the details of that are going to be yet.
What do you have going on personally right now that you're excited about, that you're working on?
Um, well, I'm in the middle of a few different records. I'm, just it's been I've been lucky enough to do a bunch. I did a record with a band called Shiny Ribs in Austin. It's
Oh
pretty
yeah.
great. I'm getting ready to do a record here in Portland with a guy named Jose Medelis, who was the drummer in the Pixies.
Oh yeah.
Uh, he's got a drum store called Revival that all the drummers in the world know and love because he's kind of a special guy. But he's got a really interesting band, and that's going to be uh, in January. I'm finishing a record with a guy named Rush Sturgis. It's kind of like he calls it folk hop music, so it's kind of a little bit different for me, like stuff I've not really ventured into before, but that's been a while. What else? I got like 5 different records in various states of completion or about to be done. So this is what I wanted to do. This is the life that I wanted, and I'm getting to do it. So I couldn't be more grateful or happy about it.
Sounds like you have a "I'll sleep when I'm dead," mantra a little bit.
I just like, I really enjoyed making records. It's fun. It's unpredictable. You never know what you're going to get. Some days are amazing. Some days you just got to slog through it like anything else. But I'm like I said, it's I enjoy it. It's I'm lucky enough that the Lobos is financially viable enough that I don't need to get paid $1 zillion to do it. So but if I want to make a record, I'll do it. And it doesn't. It's just how I don't care. I just want to do a record. I should mention there's another one. I think it's going to be out very soon. It's called the Rasquatchy Liberation Front. Rasquatchy is spelled Rasquache, which was it was my COVID project. It's me and a guy named Chris Clark, and it's sort of like a psychedelic, dare I say, I don't know. It's kind of like all over the place in a good way. And it was sort of like we started it right at the dawn of COVID when, I didn't know if I'll ever play music again or the house again or, like nobody really knew what the fuck was going to happen. And so sort of like, it was just sort of like, well, let's just make interesting music. And we did. It's kind of a, cool, fun, weird record that'll I hope, so far the people that have heard it really like it. I hope
when's it going to come out?
Any day. It's label is it's a label called Cosmica.
Okay.
It's a mostly Latin label that small, basically it's one guy runs the whole thing. It's sort of like there's another artist on the label named Carla Morrison who's kind of a big deal, and she's like a megastar in Latin America. So it's sort of like, as he can deal with it around her release schedule. So I know it's supposed to come out in the fall, and now it's been postponed a couple of times just because she's kind of blowing up her stuff. So it should be out soon, but I'm very proud of it. It came out really good.
Nice, man. I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So one last question, you're in this cabin, you got your 5 albums, you got the band, you got Bitches Brew. And I always ask everybody if when you're escaping the apocalypse and going up to this cabin, in the event that you could take one thing with you that you're able to carry, what would it be?
Sheesh. One thing. Well, I guess the phone wouldn't really be a thing. Who could you call?
You could take it, but it probably wouldn't be very useful.
I'd have to bring some way to make music, I would think. I don't know, like a keyboard. I don't know. I think some device that could capture something musical on either me making it or somebody else making it. Maybe an iPad, just because it has all that shit on it.
Well, a baritone sax could be a good weapon if zombies are at the door.
Could be a good weapon, but honestly, I'd probably it's a little. If that's all I'm going to take away, I'd probably need something a little more useful.
Oh, and also, when you were saying that you left Philly in 74 is what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that the reason why the Flyers haven't won the cup since then?
Quite possibly. Yeah, I didn't really think about the correlation, but it's hard to dispute the evidence.
Sounds like it was you,
Yeah, evidently. You know that the whole thing about La Bamba and the Oilers? Do you hear about that?
No.
So the Oilers uh, adopted La Bamba as their fight song, and
Oh, wow.
run to obviously they lost to you guys, but
Mhm.
in their like they had a so back to the Gretzky era. He was dating a girl before one of wherever the wife was, who had a developmentally, or I believe it's called neurodiverse brother,
Mhm.
and so Gretzky insisted that the organization hire this guy, and he became a beloved figure. He'd worked for the Oilers for all of those years, back to the '80s, back to the Gretzky era.
Mhm.
Why am I spacing on his name right now? But he passed early in the pandemic, and his thing was whenever the Oilers would win, he would say, play La Bamba, baby. So, the Oilers run last year was really improbable. They came from they were the last seed in.
Yeah.
As they knocked off more and more of the higher seeds, the whole La Bamba thing became like a thing. So right now, when you drive into Edmonton, there's a big "Play La Bamba Baby" statue outside the city, and it became a huge thing. And to be honest with you, I wasn't aware of it till well after it had already started. I have a friend who's a sportscaster in Canada, and he was like, "Are you aware of any of the stuff that's going on in Edmonton?" I was like, not really. And so like it was the thing. And then, very innocently, I tweeted something like, hey, you got, like that we were paying attention, and it became this huge thing. And then suddenly they're like the last Canadian team in,
Yeah.
and it's like the whole country. So I was like, you know, before they got wiped out by the Avalanche, that, like every day I was on Canadian television or radio,
That's awesome.
La Bamba every day. So it was pretty cool.
Well, if they can get past the Avs this year, maybe you guys can go and play the parade for the
Yeah,
Lincoln
well,
Cup.
I told them we were supposed to go there in October, and unfortunately we had to pull out of the tour. But yeah, we had like a whole kind of thing planned. So at some point we will go there, and we probably have like a little celebration, because it was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
It was similar here with Blink 182, because they
Really?
um at the end of the third period in every Avs home game, they play the small things. Uh, Um, and then it's magical because once play actually starts, the crowd continues singing the song, the entire song. And it's one of the few times at an American sporting event that you feel the way it must be in Latin America and Europe with songs and that group experience.
I did not know that. That's kind of awesome. Wow.
And so they won the cup, and then Mark Hoppus came to the banner raising in Denver
Huh.
this year. Yeah.
And is Blink 182 Colorado? They're not Colorado band, right?
No, it's completely random. Totally, totally random. Yeah.
Crazy. Well, good
Yeah.
for them. That's cool.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me, Steve.
Hey, man, my pleasure.
Absolutely.
I'll give you another hour.
That was Steve Berlin of Los Lobos. And that was me geeking out like only a ridiculous geek can. Thanks for listening, and please have a safe and happy New Year's Eve and New Year. I'll be playing drums up in Netherlands this Saturday night in one of my bands, opening up for Gasoline Lollipops at their big New Year's Eve show. Uh, Today, though, I'm actually leaving for a week in Mexico, where I'll definitely be listening to the playlist I made last time I went there. It's the ultimate dad joke, but I'll see you next year. Send me an email at milehighstash@gmail.com with any tips for resolutions or guests you think I should have on, or just to say hello. Ciao.
So you wanna rise above duality, you wanna transcend